Be me, I guess. This is hard to write, but I need to get it out somewhere. My whole life just kind of imploded a few days ago. It all comes back to my friend Howard, or my ex-friend, I should say. We grew up together, lived on the same street. Our parents were friends, so we were basically forced to hang out from the time we were toddlers. It wasn't forced for long, though. We just clicked. He was the brother I never had. I remember summers spent in his family's basement. It was always cool and dark down there, even on the hottest days. We'd play video games for hours, the old consoles with the chunky controllers. We built massive forts out of couch cushions and blankets. We had this whole elaborate world with its own rules and characters. He was always the quiet, steady one. I was the one with the crazy ideas. He never made me feel weird for being a girl who liked video games and comics. In school, we had each other's backs. If I was having a bad day, he'd know without me having to say anything. He'd just show up with my favorite candy bar or suggest we go for a walk. He was just there, a constant. I thought he'd be there forever. High school was more of the same, just with more people. We had a solid group of friends, about 5 or 6 of us. It was a good mix, guys and girls. We all just got along. We'd have movie nights, go to football games, the usual stuff. Howard was the anchor of the group. Everyone liked him because he was just so easy to be around. He wasn't loud or desperate for attention. He just had this calm confidence. Then college happened. We went to different schools, a few hours apart. We promised to stay in touch, and for the first year, we did. We'd call, text, visit each other's campuses a couple of times. But college, it changed me. And I mean that in a good way. For the first time, I was surrounded by people who were thinking about the world on a deeper level. I wasn't just Connie from Elm Street anymore. I was forming my own identity. My new friends were incredible. They were so aware, so passionate. We'd stay up all night talking about society, about power structures, about injustice. It was like a light switched on in my brain. I started to see things I'd never noticed before. The way professors talked to male students versus female students. The kinds of jokes people told without thinking. The assumptions everyone made about everyone else. It was overwhelming at first, seeing how much was wrong with the world. But it was also empowering. I felt like I was finally awake. When I'd come home for breaks, things started to feel different. My old life seemed so small, so simple. I'd try to talk to my parents about what I was learning, but they'd just smile and nod. I tried to talk to Howard and our old friends too. I remember one of the first times it felt really weird. It was probably Christmas break of my sophomore year. We were all at our friend Mike's house, just hanging out. Someone put on some comedy special on TV. The comedian was making all these jokes and everyone was laughing. But I wasn't. I was just sitting there, feeling my stomach tighten. The jokes were all based on these tired, harmful stereotypes about men and women. I couldn't just sit there and pretend it was okay. So I said something. I just pointed out that the humor was kind of punching down, you know? The room went quiet. Everyone just stared at me. Howard was the one who broke the silence. He kind of laughed awkwardly and said, "Connie, it's just a joke. Don't overthink it." Overthink it? That was the whole problem. People weren't thinking. I tried to explain why it mattered, how media shapes our perceptions. They just looked uncomfortable. The rest of the night was strained. It felt like I had ruined the fun. But wasn't it more important to be aware than to just have mindless fun? That pattern started repeating itself. We had a movie night a few months later. We were going to watch some old action movie we all used to love as kids. I hadn't seen it in years. Watching it with my new perspective was a trip. The main character was this walking example of toxic masculinity. Solved every problem with his fists. The female characters were either helpless damsels or rewards for the hero. I couldn't help but make comments. I wasn't trying to be annoying. I was just pointing out the obvious. After about 45 minutes, I think I said something like, "Can we just acknowledge how problematic this is?" Sam, another friend from our group, let out this big sigh and said he was getting a headache. Howard tried to play peacemaker, suggesting maybe we could just enjoy the nostalgia. I told him nostalgia wasn't an excuse for ignoring harmful messages. The discussion got a little heated. I didn't raise my voice, but I was firm. Eventually, Howard just turned off the TV. He said maybe movie night was a bad idea. Nobody disagreed. People started making excuses to leave pretty soon after that. I felt this mix of frustration and loneliness. Why couldn't they see what I was seeing? Were they really that blind? Or did they just not care? It was around that time that I met my boyfriend. He was a couple of years older, and we met through a campus group. He was the first person I'd met who really understood. He had read all the same things I had. He knew the terminology. Talking to him was so refreshing. I didn't have to explain myself or apologize for my views. He supported me. He told me I was brave for speaking up. He would listen to me vent about my old friends, and he'd always take my side. He'd say things like, "It's not your fault they're fragile. Their privilege is being challenged for the first time." It made so much sense. When I brought him home to meet everyone, it was okay. My parents were polite. Howard was polite. But I could tell they didn't really get him. My boyfriend tried to engage them in a conversation about politics, and they just gave these short, non-committal answers. Later, Howard took me aside and asked if I was happy. I told him I was, very happy. He just nodded and said, "Okay, he just seems very agreeable." I didn't understand what he meant by that at the time. I thought being agreeable was a good thing. I now realize he was being condescending. He was judging my choice in a partner. The friendship group really started to splinter after that. The invitations to hang out became less frequent. And when they did happen, it was often in smaller groups that, coincidentally, didn't include me. I saw pictures on social media of them out together. It stung. I confronted Howard about it once. I asked him why I was being excluded. He got really quiet and said it wasn't intentional. He claimed that people just felt like they had to walk on eggshells around me. He said it felt less like hanging out and more like attending a lecture. I was furious. I told him I was sorry for trying to be a conscious human being. I said I was sorry for caring about the world beyond our little suburban bubble. He didn't have a good answer for that. He just looked sad. One of the worst moments was for Sam's birthday. I really thought about what to get him. I didn't want to just buy him some meaningless stuff. I wanted to give him something that would help him grow. I bought him this really important book about modern masculinity and the harm of traditional gender roles. I was actually excited to give it to him. I thought it could be a breakthrough. When he unwrapped it, he had this blank look on his face. He said, "Oh, thanks, Connie." I tried to start a conversation about it, right there at his party. I asked him if he'd ever thought about how the patriarchy hurts men, too. You could have heard a pin drop. His girlfriend shot me a look that could have curdled milk. The whole vibe of the party just deflated. It was so frustrating. I was trying to help, trying to open up a meaningful dialogue. They treated me like I had set off a stink bomb in the living room. After that, I pretty much only saw Howard. He was the only one who still made an effort. He'd call me every few weeks just to check in. Our conversations were shorter. We had less and less to talk about. We couldn't talk about movies or TV shows without me pointing out what was wrong with them. We couldn't talk about his work because I felt it was my duty to remind him of the systemic advantages he had in his field. He got a promotion once, a few years after college. He was so excited when he called me. He told me all about the project he'd led and how his boss had been so impressed. My first thought wasn't about him. It was about the system. I asked him, "That's great, but do you know who you were up against? Was there a woman on your team who was just as qualified?" There was this long pause on the other end of the line. Then he just said, in this really flat voice, "I don't know, Connie. I was just happy about my accomplishment." I told him he should be happy, but it was also important to be aware of the context. I was trying to give him a more complete picture. He changed the subject pretty quickly after that. I felt like I had done the right thing, planting that seed of awareness. My boyfriend agreed. He said that true friends hold each other accountable. So Howard and I kept up this weird, strained friendship. It was mostly just us, meeting for coffee once every couple of months. He'd ask about my life. I'd ask about his. It was all very surface level. He never brought up our friends, and I didn't either. It was this unspoken taboo. I think deep down, I was still holding out hope that he would eventually come around, that he'd see I was right all along. He was smart. He was a good person. I thought it was only a matter of time, but I was also building a life without him, without any of them. My boyfriend and I had our own circle of friends. We'd go to protests, attend panel discussions, host potlucks where we'd talk about real issues. I felt seen. I felt understood. But sometimes, late at night, I'd feel a pang of something. I'd remember laughing so hard with my old friends that I couldn't breathe. I'd remember the easy comfort of being with people who had known me my whole life. I told myself it was just nostalgia for a time when I was ignorant, the happiness of the unaware. I told myself that my new life, my new friends, my new relationship, it was all more real, more meaningful. I was doing the work. I was making a difference. My relationship with my boyfriend was a partnership of equals. We checked in with each other constantly. We processed every disagreement. He always deferred to my perspective on social issues, acknowledging his own blind spots as a man. He was a good ally. Howard, on the other hand, was stuck. Every time I saw him, he seemed the same. Same job, same apartment, same quiet, unassuming demeanor. I started to feel a little sorry for him. He was trapped in a mindset that was holding him back. He was clinging to a world that didn't exist anymore, or at least a world that shouldn't exist. I saw it as my responsibility, as his oldest friend, to keep trying to reach him. Even if our conversations were awkward, even if he was resistant, I was the only one left who could show him a better way to be. Our last few coffee meetings were particularly tense. We got into a debate about the wage gap. He tried to bring up nuance, talking about different career choices and hours worked. I had to shut that down immediately. I explained that what he was saying was a common deflection used to undermine women's experiences. He just sipped his coffee and stared out the window. He didn't even argue back anymore. He just disengaged. It was infuriating. It felt like he wasn't even respecting me enough to have a real debate. He was treating me like I was hysterical. That's a classic tactic, I know. Dismiss a woman's valid points by framing her as emotional. I called him out on it. I said, "It must be nice to be able to just check out of a conversation when it gets uncomfortable for you. That's a privilege I don't have." He just looked at me, and his eyes were so tired. He said, "You're right, Connie, it is." And then he changed the subject to the weather. I went home and told my boyfriend all about it. He was so angry on my behalf. He said Howard was being passive-aggressive and manipulative. He said that maybe it was time for me to stop putting energy into a friendship that was so one-sided. He told me I deserved friends who celebrated my intellect and passion, not ones who were intimidated by it. I knew he was right, but I couldn't bring myself to cut the cord completely. There was still that little piece of me, the girl in the basement building couch forts, that couldn't let go of Howard. I thought there had to be a way to get through to him. I just needed the right moment, the right opportunity to make him see. I had no idea that moment was coming, and that it would destroy everything. The call came on a Tuesday, I think. It was late afternoon. I was in the middle of writing a blog post about problematic tropes in holiday movies. I saw Howard flash on my screen. I almost didn't answer. I was still annoyed from our last conversation. But I did. His voice was strange. It was thick, like he was trying not to cry. He told me his dad had a heart attack. He was in the hospital. It was serious. I felt a jolt of shock, of course. His dad was always so kind to me. Howard was talking, but it was all a jumble. Words about doctors and waiting rooms and not knowing what was happening. He sounded completely lost. He sounded like a little boy. And as I listened to him, this thought formed in my head. A clear, analytical thought, cutting through the emotion of the moment. This was it. This was the teachable moment. He was vulnerable. He was feeling emotions he probably hadn't been allowed to feel his whole life. Society, the patriarchy, teaches men to be strong, to be providers, to be pillars of strength for their families. It doesn't teach them how to cope when their own pillars start to crumble. He wasn't just sad about his father. He was experiencing a fundamental breakdown of his masculine conditioning. He was being confronted with the fragility of the very structures he had always relied on. I knew what I had to do. I couldn't just offer him empty platitudes. "I'm sorry," and "I'm here for you," were useless. I had to give him a framework to understand what he was going through. I had to give him the tools to process this in a healthy, constructive way. So I waited for him to pause, to take a breath. And then I started to explain. I started explaining it to him. My voice was calm and measured. I wanted to be a source of clarity for him in his confusion. I told him, "Howard, I know this is hard, but what you're feeling right now is a textbook response." I said something along the lines of, "This is a typical problem. Patriarchy doesn't teach men how to properly process their emotions, which is why you're reacting so strongly." I remember the exact words I used next, because they hung in the air between us. "You need to deconstruct your emotional dependency on authority figures, like your father." There was complete silence on the other end of the line. It wasn't the kind of silence where someone is thinking. It was a dead, empty silence. I thought maybe the call had dropped. "Howard," I asked, "are you there?" I heard him take a slow, shaky breath. Then he said, in a voice I had never heard before, a voice that was completely devoid of any emotion, "I have to go." And he hung up. I stared at my phone, a little confused. I thought maybe he was just overwhelmed and needed a moment. My explanation had probably been a lot to take in on top of everything else. I told my boyfriend about the conversation. He confirmed that I had done the absolute right thing. He said that offering him a critical framework was far more valuable than shallow emotional support. He praised me for being strong enough to put education before coddling, even with a close friend. I felt reassured. I had been a good friend, a true friend. I sent Howard a text a few hours later, just a simple, "thinking of you." He didn't reply. The next day I texted again, asking for an update on his dad. No reply. By the third day I was starting to feel a little annoyed. I understood he was going through something, but to completely ghost me after I had offered him such a profound insight, it felt incredibly ungrateful. Finally, on the fourth day, he sent a text back. It was just 7 words. "We need to talk. Coffee shop tomorrow." My first feeling was relief. He was ready to talk. He was ready to process. My framework had probably sunk in, and now he was ready to discuss it further. I agreed to meet him at our usual spot. I spent that evening preparing. I went over key concepts in my mind, thinking about the best way to guide him through this. I saw this as a turning point, not just for him, but for our friendship. We were finally going to connect on a deeper, more honest level. I arrived at the coffee shop a few minutes early. He was already there, sitting at a small table in the corner, staring into a cup of black coffee. He looked awful. He had dark circles under his eyes, and he looked like he hadn't slept in days. He looked older. When he saw me, he didn't smile. He just gestured to the chair opposite him. I sat down, ready to begin our session. I started with a gentle opening. "I'm so glad you're ready to talk about this. I know it's a lot to—" He cut me off. "I'm not here for that, Connie." His voice was flat, cold. "I'm here to say goodbye." I just stared at him. I couldn't process the words. Goodbye? What did that mean? "What are you talking about?" I asked. He didn't answer my question. Instead, he started talking in that same detached voice. "Do you remember that night at Mike's house when you got upset about the comedy special?" The question was so random, it threw me off. "Vaguely," I said. "Why?" "After you left, everyone was quiet. Then Mike said he probably wouldn't host another get-together for a while. It was too stressful." Before I could respond, he continued. "Do you remember when we tried to watch that old action movie?" I nodded slowly. "Sam called me the next day. He said he loved you like a sister, but he couldn't hang out with you anymore. He said he just wanted to relax with his friends, not feel like he was in a courtroom." My throat felt tight. Where was this going? "Sam's birthday," he said, his eyes still fixed on his coffee cup. "Do you remember that? He used your book as a doorstop for a few months. He thought it was funny. Then he threw it out." I felt a hot flush of anger and humiliation. "They were just too immature to understand," I said, my voice defensive. Their male fragility couldn't handle being challenged. For the first time, he looked up from his cup and met my eyes. There was nothing there. No anger, no sadness. Just emptiness. "No, Connie," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "They just wanted their friend back. The friend who could laugh at a stupid joke. The friend who could just enjoy a movie without dissecting it. The friend who would celebrate their successes instead of questioning them." He took a slow sip of his coffee. "When I called you about my promotion, I had just come from telling my parents. They were so proud. I was so proud. I just wanted my best friend to be proud of me too. But you didn't congratulate me. You accused me." He put the cup down with a soft click. "And then, my dad," he said, and his voice finally cracked, just for a second. My whole world was falling apart. I didn't know if he was going to live or die. I called you. I called you because for 25 years, you were the one person I could call." He looked right through me. "And you didn't hear a friend in pain. You saw a project, a specimen. You gave me a lecture." I opened my mouth to defend myself. I wanted to explain about frameworks, about healthy coping mechanisms, about how I was trying to help him in a more meaningful way. But he held up a hand. "Don't. Just Don't. For the first time, just listen. This isn't a debate. There are no points to score. This is just the truth. He leaned forward slightly. You talk so much about power and systems and privilege, but you've become the most toxic, judgmental person I have ever known. You don't see people anymore, Connie. You just see categories. You see allies and enemies, problems and projects. His words felt like physical blows. Each one landed with a dull thud in my chest. You pushed everyone away, everyone who loved you, not because you were enlightened, but because you stopped being a friend. You became a political officer, policing everyone's thoughts and words. I was shaking my head, trying to deny it, but no words would come out. I was the last one left, he said. I kept making excuses for you. I kept telling myself the old Connie was still in there somewhere. I held on because of all those summers in the basement, because of everything we'd been through. He looked down at his hands, then back at me. When you lectured me while my dad was in the hospital, you finally killed that last little bit of hope. He paused, and in that pause, I felt the entire history of our friendship collapsing into a black hole. Then he delivered the final sentence, the one that replays in my head over and over again. I've been holding on to our friendship for so long, but now I realize. He took a deep breath. Being alone is better than being with you. And that was it. The dam broke. I started crying. Not just a few tears, but these horrible, racking sobs. The kind that take your breath away and make your whole body shake. For the first time, his words had gotten through all my defenses, all my theories, all my jargon. They hit the little girl who just wanted to play video games with her best friend. I looked at him through my tears, hoping to see something. Pity, regret, anything. There was nothing. His face was a blank mask. He just stood up. He put some money on the table to cover our coffees. And then he walked away. He didn't look back. I just sat there, in the middle of that coffee shop, completely falling apart. It was like the whole world had gone from color to black and white. I finally stumbled out of there and called my boyfriend. I told him what happened, sobbing so hard I could barely speak. I expected him to be furious on my behalf, to call Howard every name in the book, but he was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Well, maybe this is for the best. He was clearly a source of negative energy in your life." That's all he said. No comfort, no hug in his voice. Just a cold, detached analysis, just like mine. I went home and he was there. He didn't embrace me. He just started explaining why Howard's reaction was a classic example of male defensiveness. He was using the same words, the same tone I had used with Howard, and suddenly I couldn't stand the sound of his voice. I looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time in a long time. I saw a man who had never once challenged me, who had never had his own opinion, who just reflected my own ideas back at me like a mirror. Howard had called him agreeable. I finally understood what he meant. He wasn't a partner. He was an echo chamber. I realized that I hadn't had a real friend, a real conversation, in years. I had surrounded myself with people who would only ever say yes, and I had pushed away the one person who had ever been honest with me, the person who had seen me, the real me, and loved me anyway, until I made it impossible for him to do so. I broke up with my boyfriend the next day. It was surprisingly easy. He just nodded and said he respected my lived experience. There was no emotion, no fight. It was like terminating a business contract. So now I'm here, in my apartment, alone. The silence is deafening. All my theories and big ideas feel like piles of ash. They can't keep me warm. Howard was right. I did this. I pushed everyone away. I traded all my real connections for a sense of intellectual superiority. And in the end, I have nothing. Being alone is better than being with you. He was talking about himself, but I think he was telling my future, because I am alone, and I have no idea how to fix it.